implementing JSP scriptlets. Now what we're going to do is kind of continue along our discussion about developing JSP pages. But instead of using that previous syntax, we're going to start showing you in this one, I'm going to start showing you how you could really start incorporating more Java syntax and more Java code embedded in your JSP pages. So we'll kind of define for you what a scriptlet is and go over the syntax on how to use scriptlets, as well as how to create more dynamic HTML generation JSP pages by combining scriptlets with HTML. And then finally, I'm going to do a nice example for you on how to go ahead and implement database access combining or using JDBC in your JSP pages using what are called scriptlets. Scriptlets allow you to create a little bit more complicated JSP pages than just using expressions because scriptlets literally have sections of embedded Java code. And they are similar to traditional JSP pages like what we looked at earlier in that scriptlets still have access to those implicit or intrinsic objects like the request object and the response object. You can use scriptlets, as I said, in such more, a little bit more complicated examples like configuring headers for a page, writing to server logs, or integrating with JSP. And we're going to do an example of that later on. As far as the syntax goes, there's essentially two types of scriptlet syntax I want you to know. The first is where you would just basically stick all of your Java code. So use an open angle bracket, a percent sign, whatever Java code you have, and then close the percent and the angle bracket. So it could look something as as complex as open the angle bracket, percent, several lines of Java, and then you finish it off like such. When declaring a variable, for example, using declarations, you make sure you put an exclamation mark in there, and that lets Java know that you're declaring basically a declaration. And that declaration has a pretty wide scope, as a matter of fact. When you declare a declaration in that fashion, that variable has what is known as instant scope, which means it'll maintain its value across multiple requests. Okay, now that we've kind of taken a look at some of the basics and some of the syntax surrounding scriptlets, let's take a look at an example. Let me go ahead and go into my RB-test1 web application directory. And in here, I've got a text file called quotes.txt. If I go ahead and open that up and put it into Notepad, it's basically a text file of about 5 quotes, okay, from Winston Churchill, Cicero, Ronald Reagan, Abraham Lincoln, and of course, Stephen Wright. Now, what I've done, and let me go ahead and minimize that for right now, what I've gone ahead and done is I've written a JSP page using scriptlets to take advantage of that. So let's go into localhost. Tomcat is already running. RB test1 and it's quotes.jsp, that file right there. Let's go ahead and have that load up and see what we get. You can see that I'm getting the quotes directly from that file, or you can't just yet, but basically you see a web page now of 5 quotes, and you go, well, hey, did that guy type those out? I mean, how's he getting those quotes? Let's go ahead and do a view source on it and see what we get. Now, this is interesting. When I do a view source, all I see is just HTML. HTML, head, and all I see is very nice HTML formatting. I mean, I see nothing that even closely resembles anything that looks like Java. Now, the question is, did I type all this out, or did I dynamically produce it? And think you can guess, knowing what we're talking about here, knowing me a little bit, I dynamically produced it. Let me go ahead and throw both files into TextPad. Select them, right click, send to, or go into TextPad, just to kind of verify that, looks like my quotes file didn't come with me, so let's drag and drop you into there. Minimize that. let's go ahead and modify a quote. And the quote is, it's better to dynamically generate HTML than to type it. And Robert Barr. Now, if I save the text file and go into my web page and Control F5 and just basically refresh the page, you can see it went ahead and dynamically added that. Some of you might actually see some very good usage of something like this right off the bat. I mean, this is basically how, news-oriented or information-oriented websites do it, right? They're either pulling it from a database or they're pulling it from, some kind of a file. Here's another quote just to prove it to you. I told you I was right. Better, how about this one? You should have listened to me. And that would be from my wife, and a very famous historical philosopher, my wife. And there you go. Now what I'd like to do is close this down and take a closer look at the Java, JSP page and the scriptlets that produce this page. Now, some of which is going to look pretty familiar to you. And again, this is just basically another way of doing JSP, a little bit more powerful, something that I take advantage of a lot. Now, here is the source for the quotes.jsp page. You could see here on line 1, we've seen something similar to this before, where we are utilizing a JSP page directive. And I say angle bracket %, use the @ sign, shift 2, the page directive, and I'm using the import, and then I specify an attribute here, or a value rather. So the import attribute and the value of the package I want to import. Now notice, in previous examples, I went ahead and actually finished this off here by, kind of fully qualifying the path or the package name to a class. But here I'm saying import equals quote java.io asterisk or star quote, which means I'm basically having, importing the ability to access all the classes in java.io. Notice too that java.io is not part of like Java 2 Enterprise Edition. It's part of the SDK, the J2 Standard Edition. And I do not have a semicolon there when I use a page directive. Okay, line 2 through 6, actually 7 if you will, is essentially just straightforward HTML. As a matter of fact, let's make this a little bit bolder by putting a heading around it. So how about an H3 there? Okay. And again, just to prove to you the power of this, and I make one little change, the next time somebody visits that page, boom, they're going to see that change right off the bat. I mean, that's how powerful this, making applications utilizing JSP technology and servlets is. Okay, so now, here we go. Notice the angle bracket %, and then this is straightforward Java. Nothing out of the ordinary going on here. Then I close the % angle bracket, if you will, or I just say angle % angle bracket, and then I close my HTML body tag and HTML tag. Now, in the scriptlet section, which is essentially everything between these two delimiters, these guys here, okay, is straightforward Java, with one exception. Normally, you might think to see system.out.println, but because I have availability to the intrinsic print stream, I could just say out.println. And what I could have literally copied and pasted this right from a servlet. Okay. Now the difference between using the scriptlet and writing a full-blown servlet is I would have had to out.println all of this if it were a servlet. Now remember, JSP pages become servlets on the fly. So you got to remember, when you're creating a JSP page, you are in fact creating a servlet. But it's a little bit easier because I can just go ahead and type the HTML that I want. You can see how HTML and the scriptlet syntax and scriptlet code just intermingle. And in a few seconds, I'm going to show you even a more example of how they closely tie together. So here you can see I'm print lining the HTML tag OL for unordered list. Here I'm using a buffered reader. And again, this is straightforward java.io, and I'm passing into it a new file reader, pathing it to quotes.txt. Just for remembering, I have to use the double backslash to escape, if you will, out the first backslash. Otherwise, I'll get a compiling error. Then I go through and I iterate through and I read the context of the file. Notice here that for every line I print, I'm using the li for list item. Then I close my ordered list, and then I close the input buffered reader. Okay. Now I'm using an ordered list here. That's why I'm getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Again, I could go ahead and specify an unordered list, which will change it from numbers, what it currently is now. Let me show that to you. It currently is numbers, but now I can go ahead and hit F5, and then I can, change that all to bullets. And I can do my, some really cool, I can incorporate JavaScript in there. I mean, the whole deal. Okay, you just have to separate, keep in mind that JavaScript is a client-side technology. So you have to know that the JavaScript that you're going to write, you should basically not out.println it, just go ahead and write the JavaScript in that section, just like you would normally. All right, let's take a look at another example using the scriptlet and HTML combination, but a pretty hardcore example here. I've created this for loop.jsp, and essentially it just will continuously loop through an integer, incrementing it. So it starts at 0 and it goes so long as it's less than or equal to, or less than, 25 or something like that. Now, of course, I didn't write this out. This is produced dynamically. Let's take a look at the source, and let's see what we have here. And you can see I've got HTML head title for loop demo. Okay, you can see for loop demo up in the top body. And look at, I mean, here's I have the table row and then all the table datas. Okay, and open, close. I mean, there we go, 0 through 24 of them. Okay. Well, let's take a look at the source. The source here shows you a nice integration of the scriptlet syntax along with the HTML. So from here straight on is, a nice beginnings of a web page. Here I've got my HTML tag, I've got my head configuration stuff. I open the body, I open a table, configure it the way I want it, specify the alignment, the border size, and the color. And then I start a table row. Now look at this. Here is some scriptlet tag. And you can tell it's a scriptlet again because all the Java goes between the percent angle brackets. And here I start in a for loop and I open it up. Notice the opening of the curly brace right after the for loop. Right after the for loop there. So I say for int I equals 0, I less than 25, increment I, open curly brace. Notice how I close the scriptlet tag and I use some just static HTML here. Then in between it, I go ahead and use an expression to produce I, or to write out I. Then I close my HTML, and then I finish the code block, the for loop block, using the scriptlet tag below. And really, from line 8, 9, and 10, show you how you can really get, a nice soup, if you will, or a nice mush of static HTML along with Java scriptlet syntax. And this code here produces this page. Okay, and it simply goes ahead and it writes it out. All right, the last thing I want to start talking to you about tonight is going ahead and integrating with databases using JDBC. Let's go ahead and run a page called customers.jsp. There it is. Go ahead and run that page. And it's going to hit my Northwind database, and it's going to pull the contact name, the company, and the phone number. And it's going to produce a nice list for me. Okay, this is very handy, very real world application. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that you'll want to do all the time. Well, what did I do to do that? Well, again, I combined some Java scriptlet information. I literally could have copied and pasted this out of any class. Line number one is my standard, you know, page declaration. I went ahead and used the import attribute and specifying it now to java.sql. Then here's standard HTML, the head section of the page. Open the body right here, HTML, configure the table just the way I like it, and I even create a static HTML first row using the TH or table header HTML tags to go ahead and make a contact name, company, and phone number. And just so you can see, the table header tag gives me that nice bolder centered. See how TH bolds and centers that. Okay, so it's not like a normal TD where it's just left justified and normal unbold text. Then I go ahead and open my scriptlet. And in here, I use a nice try-catch block. I load using the class.forName, my SQL Server 2000 JDBC driver. I use the driver manager get connection method, passing into it the URI of the server. Okay, the name of the server is devbox, port 1433, user ID SA, password is such, and it returns to me a connection. I create my statement. I create my result set. Here I'm saying select contact name as contact name, company name is company, and phone is phone number from northwind.dbo.customers. Okay, a standard SQL query. Then I go ahead and get a result. I execute that query, get a result set, and I iterate that through that query. And I'm out.printlning now a table row, open the table data, get the first column, close the table data, open a table data. Notice how that's all appended. I'm appending that string in there, okay? Get the second column, append a string to close that second column, uh, data cell, and open up a new one, okay, etc. You know what I want to do in here now is watch this. I'm going to copy this whole entire line and watch this little trick. I love this trick. Do a copy. All right, now let me go to the end here, and I'm going to say if rs.next, okay, if this is true, we're going to basically do the same thing, but this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the background color, BG color equals light blue. Let me save that. Okay, let's go ahead and refresh our page here. Then we'll come back and finish the syntax and the code there. All right, and we can see I got a syntax error. Let's take a look at it. An error occurred at line 13, and it's specifying that there's a problem with the light blue, and it's saying it expected a bracket. And this is an error message that it's a little bit confusing, and you kind of have to remember something in order to fix it. What is the problem that I'm doing here? Well, the problem that I'm doing here, and you're going to run into this a lot, so that's why I wanted to show this to you, is look at open quote, okay, string starts with an open quote, and then it ends with a quote. But wait a minute, I've got a quote, and a quote. Well, if you remember, what I have to do is if I'm using double quotes anywhere inside of a string, I have to escape them out. And I escape them out by utilizing a backslash. And basically this says, hey, treat this as a literal quote. Do not make it, or rather make it part of the string. Don't make it a quote delimiter. So now that I refresh the page, I'm going to get my effect of alternating each, every line is to be light blue. All right, so wanted to go over that because you're going to see that frequently if you forget. And then I go ahead and close my result set or my statement and close my connection. Here I'm doing the typical class issues, you know. Let's go ahead and throw an exception. Let's go ahead and let me come into here. I'm going to purposely remove, let me slide that over here. Let's purposely remove that comma and save this and then see what we get. So I'm going to do a refresh here. And you can see I get a SQL exception has occurred. Now notice I do get my static HTML table part here, okay? I get the static HTML table, and then because what happens is first I write the table, this part gets written, and then if you notice, this is where the SQL exception occurs afterwards, okay? So you'll have to kind of experiment around to get a nice effect on how you want to deal with errors. So let's go back into the SQL statement and put our comma back just so we make sure we have a good file here. Save that and refresh the page here. Run it and we get our page back. In implementing JSP scriptlets, I went over for you what a scriptlet is and why you'd want to use it versus just using general Java server page expression syntax and servlets. Showed you the scriptlet syntax using the angle bracket percents, just like we would normally use, as well as how to do some fancy things by combining scriptlets with HTML. And then we followed up with a nice example of doing database connection application using JDBC and JSP pages utilizing scriptlets. I hope you have found this informative, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.